Hello everyone, George here with another after action report, this time for Scenario 5, Hill 621. Hill 621, the actual battle took place near Minsk on July 1st, 1944. The Germans are in full retreat and the Soviets are chasing after the Axis forces with a lot of vengeance. However, keep in mind that the Soviet military doctrine continues to rely a lot on human power, on human bodies. Therefore, they continue to incur a sizable amount of casualties. So here you see my initial setup, and what I have here is two groups of uh, of um of Soviet troops. These troops over here will advance through the wheat field, establish a bit of a jumping board here into these woods and attempt to uh, crawl or inch forward to achieve their objectives here. In addition, since this group of forces is spread out uh, so so well, they have another springboard here, right down the middle of the map. On my right, I have another group of troops. Some will attempt to, rather unsuccessfully, as will see, to come up from here, and others will succeed in going through the wheat field and establishing uh, uh, a good uh, permanent position here. The German player set up in such a fashion that he can have interlocking fire like this, like this, and can also prevent people from advancing through here. As well, had he been able to hold this position here, he would definitely be in a position to deter any advance from here. Um, Up here he has his LMGs, of course, and they can fire indiscriminately at all the advancing forces. So let's see what happens next. Actually, as a preview as to what happened next, this is what I played to my opponent before uh, commencing my movement phase. I think you get the picture. So, Axis turn 2, my allied phase was over, but I managed to get a sizable amount of troops in advanced positions and other troops ready to jump off on a charge where there isn't any interlocking uh, movement paths. He was able to establish radio contact here, but that would not last very long. In addition, the squad that was manning the HMG here broke. And right off the bat, in the initial setup, the German player has to undergo a morale check, and there are quite a few troops that had broken as well. So he routed in this direction. So let's see how things progress. Um, Things had progressed to the extent that now most of his forces are retreating to escape uh, the force of the Russian firepower that could uh, go from 2 movement factors to 4 easily. So the German player at this point is attempting to establish positions where he's outside of the line of fire of the Russian forces or outside of the range, but yet could still, given any mistakes, exploit the Russian mistakes and score KIAs. In addition, he brought in his armor and kind of in this direction, here and here, and there's the fourth one is attempting to establish a line of sight to most of the troops by taking the high ground, and it's also affording the squad with the MMG some cover. Of course, it's a textbook example of how to establish a good defense. He has more or less, well, not there, but here, line of sight. He is blocking this area here. This tank has an immense amount of firepower in this zone here. However, Russians are undeterred in their advance. Now, from my perspective, I was hoping he would put the tanks in a position where they can fire on the advancing T-34s. For some reason or another, my opponent found it more affordable or more reasonable to use or attempt to use the tanks against the infantry first. And I was a bit shocked. I was expecting him to fire upon my infantry, and instead he was firing. I was expecting him actually. That's a correction. I was expecting him to fire upon my tanks. Instead, he kept targeting the infantry with his tanks. And well, from my perspective, I would have attempted to establish armor superiority on the field and then go after the soft targets. But to each his own, I suppose. Let's advance to the next slide. Well, here's the result of the big hurrah. As planned, the Soviets are establishing bases where they can fire in close proximity to the German units. As it stands here, the Germans rather will see it fit to retreat strategically here and try to set up an ambush point. The Soviet armor has also came in. There's a Russian unit here in reserve. There is, I believe, a Russian unit here that will attempt to advance in this direction. Excuse me. There's also a unit here that basically has, I believe, if I could be wrong, a line of sight here, here, and here. Now the other three units, they all advance this way and are attempting to flank him. As you'll see in the next turn, again I held back on this unit here and attempted to flank with these two. The leader, he broke. Nobody was able to get to these support weapons here, including the radio, because my strongest leader kept watch on them. And with the LMG that he had, he was in a position to fire indiscriminately at different areas of German forces that were defending this line here and force them to rout. So here again, I'm advancing almost in a phalanx-like fashion with plenty of reserves here. We managed to knock out his tank here. And despite trying to cut my forces here, one unit of T-34s advanced after the other, from here to there. And now these tanks are threatening the entry of his reinforcements that are scheduled to enter on turn 4. Also, I managed to get up two T-34s up here. Eventually, one would have their gun malfunction, but I put him in this wood hex here, and he acted as a stationary machine gun. His main armament malfunctioned, but not his coaxial machine gun. In addition, this tank here posed a threat. And now I'm pretty free to bring up as many reserves as I can, but being a little bit sneaky, I also have a tank here that would eventually make his way right down to this powerful hex and establish a hull down position. So essentially I came up with a pincer movement with respect to my tanks, using taking advantage of their 16 movement factors and extra mobility compared to the German armor. Next slide. Turn 6. It looks pretty grim. We've knocked out 3 out of the 4, actually 4 tanks. And basically now they have free movement on this flank, okay, to advance onto the victory locations. Most of these squads here are under desperation morale, and the Soviets are approaching. This leader here would jump here and take advantage of the situation to rally as much troops as possible. There's an engineer holding the line here. However, I would jump across here as well and fire here. His tank here was kept missing, although eventually they were able to knock out the 2 tanks on this side. What happened was the shift of power came along this axis here. Another Russian tank got knocked out here. This fellow continued. This tank here and the squads below him with the machine guns were able to cover most of these hexes and prevent anybody from advancing on to these support weapons. Now, the other tactic that my opponent used was to place half-tracks as roadblocks, but that didn't work so well. As you can see, the advance here went successfully. I have a tank in a hold down position. This fellow did not have any line of sight here, and the moment I decided to advance, these forces retreated, and I believe one unit advanced this way while the other advanced that way, or rather along this axis here. So it was becoming a very dismal situation for the German player. It was a question of advance, fire, and extol a lot of attrition on the German player, to the point where to avoid the massive Russian firepower, he had to retreat. Turn 8, the end. Again, I want to reiterate that this unit here was simply overwhelmed by Russian units along here. We ended up having a close combat where this unit essentially was eliminated. The Russians flanked in this direction here. This tank was ineffective completely. We managed to capture most of the hexes. The assault engineers were all devastated. And eventually my opponent gave up, conceded the game. and tapped out. Now that's pretty much what happened in scenario 5. On scenario 9, it was not a happy uh, as a uh, as a happy event. Then well, there is no happy events in these games. They're filled with a bit of anxiety. They're filled with a bit of tense moments. Some of them are disheartening. However, as a German player in scenario 9, things did not fare so well for me. And we'll have another after action report for scenario 9 sooner than later, I hope, time permitting. But in the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this after action report. And if you have any questions or comments, I would gladly answer them. Just post them below or on Facebook. Thank you.